The janitor walked slowly through the marble lobby, his shoes flapping with every step. Their soles were nearly gone, threads unraveling, soaked from the morning rain. The CEO noticed and sneered without mercy. "Can't afford real shoes, Paul?" he said, sipping imported coffee. Laughter echoed behind him from the junior executives. Paul didn't answer. He never did. He just looked down, gave a small nod, and kept sweeping. The CEO watched him vanish down the hall, still chuckling. But something about Paul's silence lingered longer that day. Paul had worked nights in the building for 12 years. Never late, never missing a shift, never asking for anything. Only those broken shoes told a story no one asked about. Each time the CEO saw him, the jokes got colder. Once he left new shoes by Paul's cart, as a prank. Paul returned them without a word. But one rainy Monday morning, Paul didn't show up. His cart stood alone, wheels still wet. Mop leaning sideways, taped to the cart. A folded envelope with the CEO's name. He opened it with a smirk, expecting a resignation. Inside was a letter, handwritten, shaky but careful. 12 short lines. Every one of them burned. "I know my shoes embarrassed you, but they fed my daughter. She's 8. She likes stars and stories. She's surviving leukemia. I wear those shoes so she never sees me cry. I clean your glass towers so she can dream in peace. I take your jokes because pride doesn't feed children. And still, I wish you well, truly." The CEO sat down right there in the lobby. Crowds passed him, confused, but he didn't move. The letter shook in his hands like a confession. He didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Next morning, he walked in wearing simple sneakers, and behind him, a quiet delivery, brand new shoes in Paul's size. The CEO called every hospital in the city, found Paul's daughter in a children's cancer unit, room 214. He didn't speak, just left a note, for her stars and his silence. 1 week later, the janitor returned. Same slow walk, same tired eyes, new shoes, but this time, the CEO stood and clapped. No jokes, no audience, just respect. They nodded at each other like old soldiers. And for the first time, both men smiled. By year's end, Paul's daughter rang the remission bell. The CEO funded a scholarship in her name. And in the lobby, a plaque now reads, "The janitor's shoes were worn down, soles nearly shredded. Every step echoed across the polished floor, his feet stumbling more than walking." The CEO barely noticed until the faint sound caught his attention. "Still in those old things, Paul?" he mocked, looking at the tattered shoes. A few employees snickered quietly, but the CEO's voice carried through the hall. Paul looked up, his tired eyes meeting the CEO's. No anger, just silence. He had always been quiet, almost invisible, to everyone except the walls he cleaned. But it was his shoes, always torn, always stained, that seemed to make him different. Every day Paul showed up, cleaning the same spots, the same floors, never complaining. The CEO had watched for weeks, always with the same joke. "How can you even walk in those?" He'd laugh, but Paul never answered. The janitor just kept working, as if the world didn't notice the small, silent man. One morning, Paul was missing. The cart sat empty, his shoes nowhere in sight. The CEO didn't think much of it at first. Another sick day, maybe. But then he noticed the small, crumpled envelope left by the cart. With a sigh, the CEO opened the envelope, expecting something petty or rude. Instead, inside was a letter, its edges frayed, as fragile as the shoes it spoke of. The ink was messy, hurried, yet it carried a raw truth that hit like a punch to the gut. "I wear these shoes because I can't afford better, but it doesn't matter. My daughter is sick, sir. Leukemia. I've spent all I have on her treatment. These shoes? They're all I've got left, but they keep me going. Every day I clean the floors you walk on. I keep them spotless for you, but I can't. Keep her spotless no matter how hard I try. I wish I could buy her the stars she wants, but for now I just give her hope. The CEO's hands trembled as he read. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't even considered the possibility that those shoes held more than wear. They held a story, a quiet man's struggle, a father's love for his child. The next morning, the CEO walked in early, his heart heavy. He went straight to the janitor's closet, found a pair of shoes, brand new, his size. He didn't know what to expect, just that Paul needed to know someone cared. When Paul returned, he paused by the cart, his old shoes still there. But this time something new had appeared, a note with a fresh pair of shoes beside it. Paul picked them up, his eyes filling with surprise, but he said nothing. The CEO stepped forward, his voice quiet, sincere. "You deserve more than just these floors, Paul. Take care of yourself." For once, the CEO didn't laugh. He didn't mock. He simply respected the man before him. By the end of the month, Paul's daughter was getting better. The treatment worked, the chemotherapy slowly taking its toll, but hope remained. The CEO quietly arranged for medical bills to be paid, an anonymous donation, and every time Paul walked through the lobby, he wore new shoes. The CEO never said another word, but every day they nodded, silently understanding. Sometimes the most meaningful stories are the quiet ones. The CEO always walked past Paul's worn-out shoes with a chuckle. His pristine, polished shoes made the janitor's ragged pair look like they belonged to another world. Paul, however, said nothing. He just continued sweeping the floor, invisible to most. "Still wearing those shoes?" the CEO mocked one morning, loud, enough for everyone to hear. Paul didn't flinch, just smiled weakly, his eyes tired but calm. The laughter of the office rang out, but Paul didn't join in. He never did. Day after day, the CEO found amusement in the janitor's torn shoes. It became a part of his routine. Mock, laugh, forget. But what the CEO didn't see was how much strength was in Paul's silence. Then one day, Paul didn't show up. The office buzzed, but the janitor's cart stood empty. The CEO, for the first time, felt a flicker of unease. That morning, something was different. A small envelope lay on the janitor's cart. The CEO approached, his curiosity piqued. Inside was a letter, folded with care, the handwriting shaky but deliberate. "Sir, I know my shoes are torn, but they've carried me through some tough times. My daughter is sick. She has cancer, and these shoes are all I've had left. I walk these floors so she can breathe, so she can dream of a better life." The CEO read the words, but they didn't settle. He felt a knot in his stomach, a strange ache, guilt perhaps, or something deeper. He had mocked this man, a man whose life was filled with struggles he couldn't even fathom. "I never complained about the shoes because I had to keep walking. For her. These shoes, broken as they are, carry my love for her. And one day, I hope she'll understand. I've cleaned your office for years, but never asked for anything in return." The words hit him harder than he could have imagined. His smile, once so confident and sharp, vanished. In its place, a painful realization. The luxury he had taken for granted, the arrogance he had worn like a crown. That evening, the CEO sat, alone in his office, the letter in his hands. He couldn't shake the feeling that his entire perspective had just shifted. It wasn't just about shoes. It was about the people who wore them, the lives they carried. The next day, he walked into the janitor's closet and placed a new pair of shoes by the cart. But this time, he didn't just leave them there. He waited for Paul, and when the janitor came in, he spoke softly. "You've worked hard, Paul. You deserve more than what I've given you. Take the shoes, and if you need anything at all, just let me know." For the first time, the CEO felt a deep, genuine respect for this quiet man before him. Paul's face softened, and he nodded slowly, his eyes filled with gratitude. It wasn't just about the shoes anymore. It was about dignity. A simple act of kindness had opened the CEO's eyes to a truth he had ignored for too long. Months passed, and Paul's daughter slowly recovered. The CEO quietly arranged for her treatment to be fully covered. No questions asked. But it wasn't the donation that mattered most. It was the silent acknowledgement that change had come. One morning, Paul came into work wearing his new shoes. This time, the CEO didn't mock. He simply smiled. A real smile. One that spoke of understanding. And when he passed Paul in the hall, they shared a look. A look that spoke of far more than words. The CEO stepped into his office, his shiny shoes clicking sharply on the marble floor. His eyes swept over the lobby, then landed on the janitor, Paul, hunched over, cleaning with the same torn shoes. A faint smirk crossed his face. "Still in those shoes, Paul?" he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The room was silent for a moment. The laughter was nervous, forced. Paul didn't look up, didn't say a word. Each day, the CEO would laugh at Paul's shoes. They were old, worn down, and embarrassing. But to Paul, they were everything. They were all he had left after months of hospital bills and sleepless nights. Yet no one noticed the quiet strength Paul carried in those shoes. No one except Paul. Then, one day, the janitor didn't show up. The CEO barely noticed until he arrived and saw the empty cart in the corner. Something stirred inside him. A small pang of confusion, a thought he couldn't quite grasp. There was an envelope on the cart. His name was scribbled on the front. Curious, he picked it up and unfolded the letter inside, expecting something petty, a snide remark. But what he read instead stopped him cold. "Sir, I wore these shoes to work every day because they were all I had, but they meant more than that. My daughter, Mia, has cancer. The money I earned from cleaning your floors went to her treatment. Every step I took in these shoes was to keep her alive, to give her a chance to grow." The CEO felt his heart stop. He read the words again, feeling the weight of them pressing on his chest. "I never complained about the shoes. They were nothing compared to what she was fighting for. And I never said anything because I wanted to give her hope, not burden her with my pain." For the first time, the CEO felt an overwhelming sense of guilt and compassion. He had laughed at this man, a man who had carried the weight of the world on his shoulders without a word. And now he realized how small his own struggles seemed. The letter shook in his hands. He stared at the spot where Paul had always stood, suddenly realizing how much he had missed. His shoes, his laughter, they meant nothing in comparison to the quiet strength of the man who cleaned the floors. Suddenly, the lavish office and polished life seemed so far from what truly mattered. The next morning, the CEO couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. He went straight to the janitor's closet and picked out a new pair of shoes. But not just any shoes. He chose the most expensive, the most comfortable pair he could find. When Paul returned the following day, the CEO was waiting by the cart, a pair of brand new shoes in his hands. "This is for you," he said, his voice softer than usual, his words filled with sincerity. I didn't know, Paul. I'm sorry for laughing." Paul looked at him, his eyes filled with quiet gratitude. He didn't need the shoes. But the CEO had given him something more valuable: respect, compassion, and understanding. For the first time, Paul's shoes weren't just a symbol of hardship. They were a symbol of strength. And as Paul walked down the hallway in his new shoes, the CEO watched him. He no longer saw the janitor. He saw a father, a fighter, a man who would do anything for his family. The CEO made a decision that day. He would never look down on anyone again. The CEO of the company, Vincent Harris, walked through his office building as he always did, head held high. His polished shoes clicked sharply on the marble floors, echoing in the otherwise quiet hallway. His gaze shifted over the lobby and came to rest on Paul, the janitor. Paul, who always wore the same worn-out shoes, hunched over his broom, sweeping diligently as he had for years. "Still wearing those shoes, Paul?" Vincent sneered, his voice loud enough for everyone around him to hear. A few employees snickered softly behind their desks, but Paul didn't respond. His eyes remained focused on his work, his face a mask of indifference. The laughter seemed to fade into the background as Vincent continued. You'd think you'd buy yourself something new with all this time you've been working here. But Paul said nothing. The same torn shoes. The same silence. No anger, no resentment. Just the quiet, steady rhythm of his broom sweeping across the floor. Vincent watched him for a moment longer, shaking his head in disbelief. Paul didn't even seem to notice the mockery. He simply did his job, day in and day out. Vincent Harris, the CEO, walked past Paul, the janitor, every day, sneering at his worn-out shoes. His thoughts were always filled with mockery. How could someone let themselves get stuck in such a hopeless state? Little did he know, those shoes carried the weight of a father's love and sacrifice. One morning, Paul didn't show up to work. Vincent felt a strange unease growing in him. He walked down to the janitor's closet, and there he found a letter addressed to him in Paul's messy handwriting. "Please read this carefully," was all it said on the top. Vincent opened the letter, his hands trembling. Paul revealed his struggle. His daughter, Mia, was fighting cancer, and every penny he earned went toward her treatment. Those torn shoes weren't just footwear. They were the symbol of a father's silent, relentless fight for his child. Paul's letter continued with a heartbreaking request. "If you can, please help care for Mia, if I'm not around to do it." Vincent felt his stomach drop. He had mocked this man for years, never knowing the depth of his pain, the sacrifices hidden behind those tattered shoes. In a rush of emotion, Vincent decided to act. He contacted the best doctors, made sure Mia's treatments were covered, and left a note for Paul saying, "Your daughter's treatment has been taken care of." The gesture was anonymous, but Paul knew it came from Vincent. The next day, Paul found new shoes waiting for him in the closet. They weren't just shoes. They were a reminder of the silent strength and sacrifice Vincent had overlooked for so long. Paul was never told directly, but Vincent's respect for him had deepened forever. Vincent's perception of Paul had completely changed. He had once seen the janitor as invisible, but now he saw a man who had been quietly battling for his family. The shoes no longer symbolized failure. They represented the love and resilience of a father who would fight until the end. Vincent Harris, the CEO, passed Paul, the janitor, every day, sneering at his worn-out shoes. To him, those shoes symbolized failure, a life stuck in mediocrity. But he never knew the depth of the man's struggle or the love behind those tattered shoes. One day, Paul didn't show up to work. An unsettling feeling filled the air as Vincent walked to the janitor's closet and found a letter addressed to him. "Please read this carefully," the letter said, and as Vincent read, his heart sank with each word. In the letter, Paul explained that his daughter Mia was battling cancer, and every penny he earned went toward her treatment. The torn shoes weren't just shoes. They were the symbol of a father's silent fight to keep his daughter alive. Paul had never asked for help, but now he quietly requested Vincent's assistance for her future if he wasn't around. Stunned by the raw honesty in the letter, Vincent realized how wrong he had been. He had mocked a man who was enduring unimaginable pain. Without hesitation, Vincent arranged for Mia's treatment to be fully covered and left a note for Paul saying, "Your daughter's treatment has been taken care of." The gesture was anonymous, but Paul knew exactly who it came from. The next day, Paul found a fresh pair of shoes waiting for him in the janitor's closet. They weren't just shoes. They were a symbol of redemption, compassion, and a deep understanding that people's struggles are often hidden from view. Vincent never spoke of the gesture, but from that day on, he looked at Paul differently. He no longer saw him as just a janitor. He saw a man of extraordinary strength and love. As time passed, Vincent's heart was filled with a newfound clarity. He had learned that true success wasn't measured by wealth or status, but by how we lift others up when they need it most.